This is Unit 2, Lesson 2B, so it's the second video out of the two, and we're talking about the correlation coefficient. Now, the correlation coefficient is only used with linear regressions. And so later on, we're going to talk about fitting data for a quadratic regression and a couple of other functions. But so our correlation coefficient is only used for linear regressions. And what the correlation coefficient does is tells us how strongly our data fits a linear function. All right, so I already have this data set up here, and so we have a scale for our linear regression, and we'll come back to this example in just a second, but the scale goes from -1 to +1. And if you recall the types of correlations we could have a negative correlation, we could have a positive correlation, or we could have really no correlation at all. And so I'm going to put 0 in the middle here. And so what our correlation coefficient tells us, if my value, our correlation coefficient, the closer it is to -1, tells me that I have a strong negative correlation. Right, and remember what a negative correlation means, as one of my values goes up, so maybe the x goes up, my y value would go down, or vice versa, right? So that's our strong negative correlation. The closer our correlation coefficient is to +1, tells me that I have a strong positive correlation. And again, recall that a positive correlation means that both of my values would be going up. So if the x went up, the y went up, right? It'd be increasing versus decreasing. And so the closer and closer it gets to 0, this is going to say that I really don't have much of a correlation. So whenever I stick my data into stat and we do the linear regression, it doesn't matter what my points look like. Your calculator is going to fit it to a linear equation. And so even if I have no correlation at all, it's still going to give you an equation. But the correlation coefficient tells me how well this really actually fits my data. And so the closer we are to 0, either from the positive or from the negative, it's telling me that I really don't have a correlation. So if I have a negative value that's really close to 0 or getting closer to 0, I have a weak negative correlation, right? And the closer and closer I get to 0 on the positive side, it's going to tell me I have a weak positive correlation. And so again, it may fit it to an equation, but it's not going to model it very well. So if we try to use that equation to find other data points, like in my data right here, if I try to, if I have a weak positive or negative correlation when we look at the value, if I try to find something for like x equals 13, it's going to give me a value, but it's not really going to fit my trend very well, right? Versus if I had a strong positive correlation, then I knew that I could really rely on the value I got when I plugged in 13 to my equation. So how do I find this correlation coefficient? We will do it in our calculator. And the calculator is going to give us that the correlation coefficient is R. So correlation coefficient is R. All right, so that's the value we're looking for. So how do I make my calculator give me that value? So we're going to go to my calculator. And down here on the 0 above it, it says catalog, and in blue, so I'm going to press second, 0, catalog. And I'm going to scroll down to the D. So I'm looking for diagnostic on. So down, 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 down. So diagnostic on, and I'll press enter and press enter again, and it says done. Awesome. And so now I'm going to go to stat, edit. Remember, we're going to put all your x values in L1, all your y values in L2. So I've preloaded mine. And then I'm going to go over to stat, just like normal, calc, and I'm going to do my linear regression 4 and press enter. And down here, you're going to see my R value, 0.98. So that's going to tell me that this is a really strong positive correlation. So I can really rely on the equation that it's given me. So the linear regression that I get for this data is y equals, and I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. So y equals 2.25x minus 4.8. And I have a correlation coefficient, R equals 0.98. And since it's really close to positive 1, I know that I have a strong positive correlation, right? So I can really depend on this data. All right, guys. The in-class assignment is in the hub. You're only going to do number 1 and number 2. Remember to do those in your notes. And then your homework assignment is there as well. All right. I hope you'll have a good day. Bye-bye.